They dragged him out of his car, slammed him with false charges, until he exposed who he really was. Late at night in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the streets were mostly quiet, save for the occasional hum of traffic lights flickering from red to green. Marcus Reynolds, a seasoned assistant U.S. attorney, had just left a dinner with colleagues. He wasn't thinking about work, injustice, or courtrooms, just home. That changed the moment he saw flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Sighing, he signaled, pulled over, and reached for his wallet. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. There was no reason for a stop. But he knew better than to assume reason had anything to do with it. Two officers approached his window. Officer Ryan Bennett, tall and broad with a military cut, stood at the driver's side. Officer James Wilson, leaner but no less imposing, hovered near the passenger door. "License and registration," Bennett said, his voice clipped. Marcus handed over his documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Bennett glanced at Wilson before answering. "Your tail lights out," Marcus frowned. That was a lie. His car had just passed inspection, and the reflection from the rearview mirror showed his brake lights fully functional. "Are you sure about that?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice even. Bennett's expression shifted just slightly. He leaned in. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." A slow tension crept through Marcus's limbs. He'd prosecuted cases like this before, where a routine stop became something far worse. His instinct told him to comply, but his experience told him these officers were already escalating. "I'm not stepping out until you tell me why." Wilson smirked, resting his hand on his belt. "Because we said so." Marcus took a breath. He knew the law. He had spent years studying, enforcing, and defending it. He knew he didn't have to get out of the car unless there was probable cause. "I'm within my rights to ask why I'm being ordered out of my car." Bennett's patience snapped. He yanked the door open. "Step out now." Before Marcus could react, Bennett grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward. The seatbelt caught his chest, digging into his shoulder. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus barked, instinctively pulling back. Bennett didn't answer. He just grabbed harder. Within seconds, Wilson was on the other side, wrenching Marcus's arm behind his back. The sharp edge of metal cuffs dug into his skin. "You're resisting," Bennett said coldly. Marcus stared in disbelief as Wilson pressed him against the hood of his own car. His heart pounded, but not from fear, from rage. This was a game, a setup, and they thought they had already won. But they were about to realize just how wrong they were. The courtroom in East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse was packed. The air was thick with routine, clerks shuffling papers, the occasional cough, the quiet hum of whispered conversations. But beneath that, something else simmered. Marcus Reynolds sat at the defense table, his posture rigid but composed. He wasn't here as an attorney today. He was the defendant. The charges: resisting arrest, obstruction, disorderly conduct, complete fabrications. But Marcus already knew the truth didn't matter. Only what could be proven. At the front of the room, Judge Victoria Hartman peered down from the bench. In her mid-60s, she had the kind of presence that commanded authority, whether it was earned or not. Her reputation: firm, uncompromising, dismissive of nonsense. And from the way she barely looked at him, Marcus already knew where this was going. The prosecutor, Michael Thompson, walked with confidence, the kind of confidence that came from knowing the odds were in his favor. He straightened his tie and nodded to the officers sitting proudly at the witness stand. Marcus watched as Bennett and Wilson sat smugly, knowing they had the full weight of the system behind them. "Your Honor," Thompson began, "this is a simple case of an individual escalating a routine traffic stop into a physical altercation with law enforcement." Marcus exhaled slowly. The arrogance, the audacity. Thompson continued, flipping through his notes. The defendant refused to comply with officers' lawful orders, became aggressive, and had to be restrained for the safety of all involved. Marcus's lawyer, David Chen, an overworked and underpaid public defender, shot up from his chair. "Objection. There is zero evidence that my client was aggressive." Judge Hartman waved a hand dismissively. "Overruled." Marcus clenched his jaw. That was fast. Chen sighed but pressed forward. "Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without just cause. There is no body cam footage showing my client acting aggressively because no such footage exists." Thompson smirked. Body cams were not operational at the time of the arrest, but the officers' statements are more than enough evidence. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. The officer's word was all they needed. Convenient. Bennett took the stand first, delivering his well-rehearsed lines. "The defendant was combative from the start," he said smoothly. refused to exit the vehicle, raised his voice, created a hostile situation. Lies. Every word. Wilson followed up, nodding along as he added. He tensed up. We feared for our safety. We had no choice but to restrain him. More lies. Marcus's fingers curled into fists under the table. He had spent his entire career fighting against this kind of blatant corruption, and now he was living it firsthand. Judge Hartman barely hid her impatience as she glanced at Marcus's lawyer. Anything else, Mr. Chen? Chen hesitated. He knew this judge, knew her track record. She wasn't interested in fairness. Still, he swallowed hard and pushed forward. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Marcus Reynolds to the stand. This was it. As Marcus rose and walked to the witness stand, he could feel every pair of eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting to see if he would break. But he wouldn't, because what was about to happen would change everything. Marcus sat in the witness chair, exhaling slowly as the court clerk swore him in. His hands rested lightly on his lap, but inside he was simmering. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to expose the truth. Prosecutor Thompson stepped forward, pacing just slightly, an unnecessary display of confidence. Mr. Reynolds, would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during your traffic stop? Marcus met his gaze, calm, controlled. I asked why I was being ordered out of my car. That's not illegal. Thompson feigned a sigh. You refused to exit, correct? I asked why I was being asked to step out, Marcus repeated, which legally I have the right to do. Thompson smirked, glancing at the jury as if Marcus's intelligence was an inconvenience. And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply. Marcus held his stare, because there was no lawful reason to. Thompson turned to the judge, shaking his head as if he'd expected nothing less. Your Honor, it's clear the defendant. Marcus leaned forward, voice even. Before we go any further, I should probably disclose something. Silence. Thompson hesitated. Even Judge Hartman looked up, actually looking at him for the first time. Marcus reached into his briefcase. His lawyer chin tensed, unsure of what was happening. Slowly, Marcus pulled out his badge, a small, simple rectangle that had suddenly become the most dangerous thing in this courtroom. I'm Marcus Reynolds, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. The room froze. Judge Hartman's lips parted slightly, her gavel hovering over her desk but unmoving. The officer stiffened. Wilson's knee bounced under the table. Bennett's jaw went tight. Thompson's face went pale. Excuse me. Marcus tilted his head. Did I stutter? The air shifted. The jury leaned forward. The stenographer stopped typing. Even Chen, his own lawyer, looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. You're a federal prosecutor. Thompson's voice wavered just slightly. Marcus lifted his ID. That's what this says, doesn't it? And just like that, the entire case imploded. Judge Hartman sat back, her mouth pressing into a thin line. She knew if she ruled against Marcus now, if she dismissed his testimony and sided with these officers, this wouldn't just be another forgotten case. Seat would be a scandal. The courtroom wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a powder keg, and Marcus had just lit the fuse. The courtroom wasn't breathing. Judge Hartman's grip on her gavel tightened, but she didn't slam it down, not yet. She was thinking, calculating. This wasn't just a routine case anymore. This was a career-ending disaster waiting to happen. Thompson swallowed hard. His confidence, the smooth arrogance he had worn so easily, was gone. He turned to the officers, and for the first time, Bennett and Wilson looked nervous. Marcus sat there, watching the silent scramble for control. He had seen this 100 times before, in boardrooms, in back-office meetings, in hushed conversations between prosecutors when the wrong kind of case landed on their desks. But this time, he was the one who forced their hand. Tu wasn't aware of this information. Thompson stammered, flipping through his files like a man searching for an escape hatch. Your Honor, Judge Hartman raised a hand, silencing him. For the first time, her eyes locked onto Marcus's. His presence alone was now a threat. A government prosecutor wrongfully arrested, assaulted, lied about. Had this gone unnoticed, he could have been another nameless statistic, and she knew it. She turned to the officers. Bennett, Wilson. Both men sat up straight, like children about to get scolded. Would you like to amend your statements? Silence. A crack in their composure. Marcus could see it happening. Bennett's fingers curled around his knee. Wilson looked at Thompson as if hoping for a lifeline. Marcus spoke first. Before they answer that, Your Honor, I'd like to request that the court pull the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest. Thompson flinched. Marcus wasn't guessing. He knew how these things worked. If those officers had radioed in before the stop, their lie about the tail light wouldn't hold. If they hadn't, then they had violated protocol from the start. Judge Hartman studied him for a long moment. She was trapped. If she denied his request, she was burying evidence. If she approved it, she was handing Marcus the final nail in the coffin. She cleared her throat. Request granted. Bennett exhaled sharply, his composure finally cracking. Wilson shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched. They knew what was coming. Marcus leaned back in his seat, and he wasn't finished yet, because this case wasn't staying inside this courtroom. It started with a single reporter in the back of the courtroom, a young journalist from the Baton Rouge Advocate furiously typing on her laptop. Within hours, the story spread. By the next morning, Marcus's name was everywhere. Assistant U.S. Attorney wrongfully arrested by Baton Rouge cops. Federal prosecutor exposes corrupt officers in open court. Judge under fire for bias against black defendant who was a government lawyer. The internet erupted. Social media was flooded with clips from inside the courtroom, taken by people who had attended the trial. The moment Marcus revealed his badge became a viral video, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Cable news stations ran segments on the case's implications. How many others had been railroaded like Marcus, but without the power or position to fight back? But the biggest shift happened in Baton Rouge itself. Community activists organized rallies. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding accountability. Civil rights attorneys dug into old cases handled by Judge Hartman, looking for patterns of bias. And then the real blow landed. An anonymous leak internal police records. Emails between officers discussing how to justify questionable stops. Statements from other black drivers who had been pulled over, cited for false violations, then threatened with arrest if they argued. The case wasn't just about Marcus Reynolds anymore. It was about a system that had been operating in the dark for years. And now the floodlights were on. But the people in power weren't going down without a fight. The backlash was immediate. City officials scrambled. The police department issued a carefully worded statement, and Judge Hartman's office suddenly stopped returning calls. By the end of the week, the Baton Rouge Police Department announced an internal investigation a week. Performative gesture. Marcus had seen it before. A distraction. A way to pacify the public without making real changes. But this time, it wasn't enough. The pressure kept building. A civil rights attorney filed a federal lawsuit against the department on behalf of past victims. Community leaders demanded Judge Hartman be removed from the bench. Protesters refused to back down. And then the real moment of reckoning came. The case was handed over to Louisiana's Attorney General for review. Marcus sat in his apartment, watching the press conference. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing calls from journalists, lawyers, people who had been through exactly what he had but didn't have the badge to fight back. This wasn't just damage control anymore. They were running out of ways to hide. And Judge Hartman? She knew it. By the time Marcus returned to court for the verdict, her expression had changed. No more casual disinterest, no more overconfidence. She was staring at a case too big to bury, and she had to decide which side of history she wanted to land on. But would it be real justice, or just another calculated move to protect the system? The courtroom was silent. Judge Hartman cleared her throat. The weight of the past few weeks sat on her shoulders. The protests, the media scrutiny, the leaked files. She had no good options left. She looked down at her notes, but everyone knew this decision wasn't hers anymore. It was the public's. She exhaled, setting her gavel down softly. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds the defendant. She hesitated just for a second. Then finally, not guilty. A wave of relief crashed through Marcus. But he didn't move, didn't react yet. Because the case wasn't just about him. The officers sat stiffly, their faces pale. Wilson's hands were clenched, his career flashing before his eyes. Bennett, always the more arrogant of the two, leaned forward. Your Honor, She held up a hand. The court will also be forwarding all relevant materials to the state attorney's office for further review. That was it. The officers weren't walking away from this. The courtroom erupted murmurs, gasps, the rapid clicking of reporters' keyboards. For the first time, the system had turned its gaze back on itself. Marcus stood slowly. His lawyer patted his back, but his eyes were on the officers, on the prosecutor Thompson, who looked like he'd just lost everything, on the judge, who had spent years dismissing cases like his until she was forced to do otherwise. But most of all, he thought about the people who weren't in this room, the ones who had sat in this very spot before him. the ones who never got to walk free. As he stepped out of the courtroom, the cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions, people cheering. But Marcus wasn't celebrating, because this wasn't a victory. This was proof of what had always been happening. But only now, with the world watching, had the system been forced to react. And he knew the fight wasn't over, not for him, not for the people still trapped in it. He stepped past the flashing lights and into the crowd, where voices demanded real change. Because one case wasn't enough, and now nobody was looking away. If this story made you think, even for a second, then it's time to ask yourself, how many more stories like this are out there? How many people never get their moment in court? Their names never make the news. Their truth never gets heard? It's not enough to just see injustice, we have to challenge it. So if you believe that real justice means holding power accountable, then share this story. Talk about it, pay attention. Because the more people who refuse to look away, the harder it becomes for these cases to be swept under the rug. And that's how change begins.